I can't. Yeah. Yeah, that was amazing.
Hard to put that
You, yeah, you were well done too. Yes, sir, Sir Frank. Lollards, not collards, but the Lollards are a very interesting group in English history. Maybe not so much in the history of heresy because they're a relatively small group. And they sort of come and go in English history. Very interestingly, that I'm dedicating a whole day to it because I find it so fascinating because of their role in the 14th and 15th century. When you think of Richard II and the Henrys, Henry IV and V, that is to say, and of course the age of dear Chaucer, that many of you will remember because of your studies. You may have been encouraged by others to look at the yellow and black publication, but you said no because you denied yourself the guilt and shame of using those kind of aids. You wanted to read the whole thing, and I admire you. You rejected sloth in favor of dedication. But I digress. Let us remember. Yeah. I heard the muttering, and I know that the shame of that will not happen to you. Like a Lollard, get it? You'll be dedicated and devoted because you have to be. Because as we used to hear in the 1960s or 70s, being a Lollard can be hazardous to your health. Yeah. So that said, let us proceed to understand where we're going here. First of all, the English church. The English church is obviously not separated, as Frank pointed out. It's part of the Catholic Church. So we are part of a larger, shall we say, belief system that is very important to us. And remember, even with the communication system of that day, we have ways. So we can get around. But we understand it is a very turbulent time. Think Black Death. Think the Peasants' Revolt that is to occur later in the 14th century. Not to mention, think of the deposition of a king, to wit, Richard II. All of this makes this an exciting time, like every time, I guess. Time of great change. And this is to understand part of the reason that people begin to question their religious faith, I suppose. Some do, at least. But here are the concerns. And of course, this could be any period. To me, having studied some of the problems, high clergy, and of course, these are the ones, and you say, but that's not fair. Well, that's the breaks, deal with it. We're talking, of course, bishops, abbots, and you say, but what about poor Father so-and-so at Saint such and such parish? It's just the way it is. It's like the separation of people, and you understand, of course, high positions often don't go to the most qualified, they go to the person who has the clout. Clerical illiteracy, you might be surprised, is very, very great. Of course, lay illiteracy is all over. But you think clerical illiteracy, how do they get jobs? Well, they know enough to get by. Barely. But not as we would think of when we think of people who are ordained, but that is part of our understanding. superstition dealing with Christianity is not surprising at all, considering the mass of people we understand don't have the advantage of education. Therefore, knowing the difference between what they know from what they see in their world and added into it some sort of education, educated faith, will give them the answers they think they need. That is to say that they can cover those superstitions with a religious explanation. And many of you can understand that. If we didn't have, I don't know, the Weather Channel or all of that, and then we think about the conditions, we think, well, God's mad or something or other. Basically, what I'm saying is that not necessarily religion's a bad thing, but I'm just saying that sometimes it can be used for a purpose of giving perhaps greater understanding or greater rationalization for what had been superstitions. And we understand the difference, of course. Now we go. I know many of you will feel nostalgic. And I have, pups. If you want to go back to your days as a student of the Canterbury Tales, I respect you for that. You want to reread it. I hope to create that excitement you once knew in your youth. I hope I can do that. I've got a big job. I know you want to pretend, but here is what we need to know. Chaucer is very important to this story. Chaucer's son, Thomas, is going to be a big official in the English government. I bet you knew that, but Geoffrey Chaucer, I know you're all about Geoffrey Chaucer, and I respect that, but this is Thomas, Sir Thomas Chaucer to you. But it's like the kid grew up well. His wife, Geoffrey Chaucer's wife, was the sister of Catherine Swynford, later the wife of John of Gaunt. You say, whoa. So, yeah, they were going around, these Chaucers. And I know you love the Canterbury Tales. And I'm just trying to make you even more grateful for them, if that's possible. But enough of this foolishness. This photograph will give this picture, I should say, will give you an idea. And I thought it was so interesting because you know these tales. I know it brings back no crying. I don't want you to get. I know. When you think about, you probably had to recite it in Old English. You of the intelligentsia. You were probably made by your instructor to get up there in front of your classmates. Yeah, creating jealousy because of your brilliance. It's hard to be gifted. Yeah, I know you people. So all of this is to say that some of these figures in the Canterbury Tales, who of course are going to recite these stories, and some of you will remember Boccaccio's Decameron, the same idea of collecting these famous stories and telling them one to another because they were on the way to Canterbury. And of course, why is this important for the discussion of the Lollards? It's because most of these folks were connected to the church, but shall we say they had a lot of issues. I guess that's the best way to put it without being judgmental. We know about the friar. You say, oh, well, the friar, he was a man of the Lord. He was dedicated always. Not so much. He was after calling on various homes and maybe, messing where he shouldn't have been messing. And you say, well, that seems so worldly. Yeah, you think? But they all, I would assume people who heard these stories would think it's quite humorous. The traveling seducer, shall we say, the friar. The prioress is what in one day we would call a little prissy. And you say, should a prioress ahead of this kind of house for women be like that? And you know her as Madame Eglantine. Yeah. So not to offend you Chaucerians. I don't want to seem like I'm not aware of your greater knowledge. But that idea of Madame Eglantine, she tells tales of family and position and so forth and so on. And again, she's not going to get, in top 10 of what we say, none of the month or something. It's like, what are you doing here? Oh, the pardoner, he goes around pronouncing forgiveness of their issues because, of course, they had to do penance for their sins, and penance means not just breastfeeding, it means doing actual deeds. The pardoner will let you off with a warning. I mean, if you ever received a ticket for speeding, and I'm sure you haven't, but maybe you know people who have. So you understand they would not do this, but a partner would basically just sort of let you off. You probably had to pay a fee, service charge, and you were probably not penitent, but you got off. And then there's the summoner. Now, that's one you really wouldn't like. Because the summoner, again, these were all church officials. Let's not forget. They're not saying, oh, I just want to work for the Lord. Yeah, the summoner is there to bring you to court. And you say, is that good? No, it's not good at all. What kind of deeds might you have done? Bigamy? Yeah, it's not good. Adultery? You think all of these, yeah, and it's not the people's court, it's the church's court too. And cause these folks are all kinds of deeds. So you are not looking for that summoner. And then finally, of course, our hero, the parson. And you'll remember him. I had to add him because I thought they won't like everybody being nasty. Let's get a nice one in there. So I did that for you Chaucer people, that the parson loved the people, low wages, didn't get much money, but he loved the Lord and he loved his people. So all of this is to say the people who get the big money, lots, and the little people, not so much. All of this, of course, is to give you a sense of the popular view of the church. Whether it's a correct one or not, I guess we can all judge. But let's face it, the institutional church is very large. It's not based on just, all the good folks coming together. It's supposed to be everybody. And as it is, you'll forgive the word, institutionalized over the centuries, it will get more and more concerned about its rights, its privileges, and its authority. And if anybody says, well, I don't like that, then you may be trouble. And that's what I think Chaucer's trying to get off in his own way, to let us understand, of course, because it's part of life. Everybody is part of this if you stop and think about it. Because I started to think, I mean, who is not involved here? Well, in previous centuries, I might have said Jewish people, but by by this period, Jews are few and far between in this part of the world, and the Muslims haven't gotten here. So more or less, we are talking about virtually the whole population. Now, you may not accept it, but I'd keep real quiet about it. I mean, it's not like you come out and say, I'm a free thinker. Yeah, I mean, could you imagine some t-shirt, and to just get into the word heretic and make sure that we understand. Heresy essentially refers to a belief that is of the major religion, but deviates in some major way. And it's not a good thing to do, because the principle of freedom of religion is not considered an acceptable alternative route. Because, of course, if you start that, it's sort of like, like, I think of Sheriff Hotshot. You remember that anti-bug thing? It's like if you let a couple in, you're going to have more. So these religious deviants, they're unacceptable. Because that whole idea of what are we going to allow? And you say, well, then how can heretics? Well, we're going to see. And many of us will understand that academia has a major, major role to play. And that's what it makes it so interesting to me, is to think about that. But before I do, how about this handsome guy in red? Now, isn't that an example of he is not the country parson. We make sure we understand that. He's a Beaufort. And I know that people are here will understand that he was born on the wrong side of the bed. Yes, his parents, I think they loved each other very much, but at the time they may have been married to other people. Yeah, but in the Harlequin romances, aren't they always love rules all, that kind of thing? He's one of the so-called Beaufort bastards. And I know that sounds ugly, doesn't it? But it's just love child born wild, isn't that the old song? The idea being that these Beauforts, who were a product of John of Gaunt, Mr. Love Machine, right? Remember John of Gaunt? Yes, of course you do. At least if you came to class, because not to single out people, but you know who you are. So, no, you're guilty. Yeah. Wear the badge of shame. But we talked about Henry IV being the son of John of Gaunt. But John of Gaunt had another family. And this family, he was very proud of, and ultimately they would be legitimized by an act of parliament. Means you're sort of a love child, and yet you're a very special love child, because I love you so much. Now, you can't be king, or queen. But you can get all kinds of nice things, and they did. As you see, he was Bishop of Winchester, which is not bad at all. Many of you have been down south to Winchester, and it's a nice place to be bishop. And not necessarily he wasn't there to preach and teach so much as he was to pick up his check, because he had important duties in London, and that was as a royal advisor. Because remember, he was related to Henry IV and Henry V, albeit on the other side of the bed. I don't think they brought that up, but the fact is they all had the same father. So he was treated very well. And the combination of authority was very, very nice for him. And he lived to be 70. I know, me too. I mean, to make it the big 70 back in that day, you had to do something.
Genius.
Yeah, he must have been doing some serious work in out, and I don't think he was dieting, but I think he would definitely either he was very lucky or else just that life likes people with lots of power. Now, if this looks vaguely familiar to you, you probably remember the stories of Joan of Arc, because that will come up to us later. But he supposedly was the chief judge of Joan of Arc. I don't know if that's really true, but he definitely was a very, very important figure in the English government. Sometimes they could find him a little irritating, Henry IV and Henry V, but he was very, very important. And another example, I might add, of the fact that the church was being used for cushy reasons, because I don't think he was out there trying to help people. Have you read your gospel lesson for today? You know, that kind of, I don't know. I think he was a sort of ecclesiastical plutocrat. I don't think you'd want to be called something like that. That's ugly, but yeah, they don't go around calling people things like that. The ecclesiastical plutocrat, they might want you to go outside and think that was really ugly. So, but it's probably true. He had lots of power and he used it, and he did so for a very long time indeed. And then we come to our professor. Yes, John Wycliffe. John Wycliffe, who came from northern England, but spent most of his life in the place where everybody likes to be, Oxford, England, was a professor, and he was in what I assume was a very large department within Oxford, the religious studies program, right? I mean, could you imagine? I don't think we're surprised at that, because this was very, very important. And there were many colleagues of his who studied. And what's interesting to me is how often these movements of religious protest seem to start out from an academician. Because first, I mean, because we remember, don't we, Warren? I mean, people sitting around in the lounge, and just talking. I ought to get more money. They ought to have more respect for the history department, that kind of thing. And then you're like, really? I didn't say that, but I'm just saying that's what I'm thinking. The idea of what he was beginning to spout were things that were, I'll just come out and say it, heretical. And you're going like, oh no, yeah, I know. I'm sorry. I have to call these things as I see them. Because I wouldn't go in the streets of Auburn and call somebody a heretic now. I mean, hey, we've come a long way, haven't we? So all of this is to say that he's in the lounge. They don't have coffee back then, but whatever kind of nonsense they're doing, taking time off from class, or their theological readings. So they're listening to Wycliffe talk about, I don't really approve of the way the church is going. Now, I don't think he's going out in public and doing this for the local Oxonians, like in the streets of Oxford. And that, I think more or less this is a academic lounge thing. And why this is important is he can get away with it because he has a friend. This is sort of like Carole King, you got a friend. I mean, and he had a big friend. And who is that big buddy? John of Gaunt. And everybody wants a friend like that. And why would John of Gaunt like him so much? We'll never know. I'm sure you thought I was going to spout out the answer. I was building it up because I can't understand it myself, except there's something, I think. I love John of Gaunt. Carol, don't get me on this. He is a very nice, very important person. So, ratemyjohnofgaunt.com. I am all about John of Gaunt. However, many of the nobles have what I would call property lust. Yeah. Property lust means that the church possesses lands in abundance, monasteries, dioceses, all the rest. And you say, well, that's good. Let's all enjoy the fertility of the land. No, not so much. Because John of Gaunt, like many nobles, has idea more. How much more could you want? I mean, really? Lancaster? Last time we looked at, but he was a wonderful man. I know that. But I got carried away there, but he's very nice. But just to understand that for some reason, the ideas that John Wycliffe was spouting off brought him the protection of John of Gaunt. And John of Gaunt didn't agree with him, but I guess, and I'm not going to say freedom of religion or the idea of academic freedom. No, I definitely don't think so. I think he just picked him out, said, if somebody messes with you, you just let me know. And they'll be taken care of. Whatever the case, it was really helpful to have a friend like that, believe you me, because in addition to causing problems at the faculty get-togethers and teaching class, although I don't imagine he had to grade too many papers, he was actually translating from Latin into Middle English, the scriptures. And this was, of course, the Vulgate Bible, which some of you know from St. Jerome, the Latin Bible. So not an original, but one very important as being one of the early examples of a Bible, because theoretically he was supporting the idea everybody will read the Bible. Well, you and I know that's not going to happen. Not only are people too lazy, but they can't read. How often we forget I always like to start off a class, but say we just don't sometimes appreciate what literacy means because we just accept it and don't understand. Back in that day and age, it was so restricted to a small group of people. But why I say theoretically, everyone reads the Bible or should read the Bible. And then if you do, then you're going to have questions. And the questions will lead you to a critique of what the church does. RateMyChurch.com, maybe 2 stars or maybe 1. I know. Mediocre to poor. And do you go around and tell this? I don't, heart and you have a line through. I wouldn't wear that t-shirt in public. Nope. But Wycliffe does have John. Isn't that beautiful? Yeah. And you think, gosh, who is doing that? Monks. You bet. Because if you are regular folks, I don't think you're there working on manuscripts. I think you are hoeing and picking, The idea though, this is, of course, it's not up my alley because this is going to be Middle English. So we're to that period. My Latin, we're not gone. We're still there, but this is going to be the idea, and it will be used. And you say, yeah, but I'm all about King James. I know you are, and that's great. I know. But you will appreciate this. And perhaps in addition to your Chaucerian studies, rather than that cliff thing, which you keep away from, thanks to my wishes. Yes, the idea of you may want to study Wycliffe's Bible. This is from the Gospel according to St. John. And I thought it was so beautiful. And I'm just thinking about all these monks who were writing, because I'm not sure he was always complimentary of monks. A lot of folks came under his, and that's again at the faculty lounge. Could you imagine? You can get away with a lot of stuff. Folks saying stuff and they don't say anything. A dean or a provost could be having agents lurking around. So you don't want anybody to hear you say that, but you may be thinking, yeah, let's bring them down. Power to the people and all of that. But yeah. I mean, yeah, there's some subversives there at faculty meetings. They may not get much done, but they talk about it a lot. In any event, it must have been very, very controversial. Because the idea, of course, is the Latin Bible, the Vulgate, that had been the Bible for centuries. and to have a Middle English Bible, which could have been used for people who were literate, I guess, in English, would have been fairly revolutionary. I mean, they may not have known Latin, but they knew their own language, which is very, very interesting. So you say, well, I wonder if church authorities were happy about this. Well, you know, they were not. Now, to a point Frank made, this comes out in 1500, maybe, or perhaps sometime in the 14th century, 15th century, I should say. And you will see, and I just found it fascinating, they put it in modern English. And you'll notice what it says. I see the truth through true understanding is flesh and blood through his subtle works is there in the form of bread. In what manner is present need not be debated. Boy, oh boy. My friends from the 12th and 13th century would be doing backflips. Need not be debated. Well, shoot. We have debates all the time, philosophy and theology, fun times in the faculty lounge, right? I bet you would like to have been there, because if you were hanging out with a wild bunch of philosophy professors, yeah, going to a philosophy club wing, they might have been debating the subtle difference between the substance and the accidents. And you go, wow, get down. What was that? Man, we could partake. The idea of substance and accidents mean that it will be the blood and flesh of Christ, regardless of the outward signs. And you go, wow, that's some heavy stuff, isn't it? Yes, it is. And I just started because I don't want you to be hurt by this or any headaches to develop, have to listen to too much. But basically, he's saying, in the famous word that we use all too much, whatever. Yeah, no, don't you just hate that? Because people don't want to get into it. So that is the idea here. Because I mean, the last line is obviously all that matters to these folks. So, but like I say, my friends from the medieval church would not have been pleased about this at all, because this simply denies all the business. If you want to believe that, that's fine. But if you want it just to be the bread and wine, say we're just remembering Christ, that's fine too. It seems almost too simple in terms of what was going on by 1500, because you think we're coming to Martin Luther before long, but this is just one person's view. But I just thought it was interesting because basically this is essentially a denunciation of the official view of the church. And why is it the official view of the church? Well, clearly because Wycliffe is teaching ideas that are, from the point of view of the church's authority, unacceptable. I'll put it that way. Look at that. The Bible is the only true source of authority. He was totally into the Bible. And what does that mean? Well, not necessarily as we might think of it today, because obviously a lot happens since then. Because essentially the Bible was to be taken literally and was to be accepted, presumably, in everything it said. You say, but there are differences book to book. Well, that's not the way he viewed it. As far as he was concerned, it was all the Word of God. But what about what the church taught? Oh, that's a different thing. Because that's, of course, a bunch of, like, John of Gaunt's love child. And you know who I mean. Big Red. You remember him? Yeah. So obviously, now we get into pomp and circumstance. Don't we all love Sir Edward Elgar? Remember 63 going down, marching down to get your diploma? Yeah, Sir Edward Elgar. Pomp and circumstance. And there was a lot of that in the church, right? If you want to be a cardinal, you got to get those nice outfits. Because you're not just going to go around wearing anything. You're going to be looking spiffy. In other words, there's a lot of power and authority that goes with being, whoa, a bishop. I mean, I'd like to be an archdeacon. I'm not hinting, but I just say, if I could be an archdeacon, I'd take that. You say, what do I get out of that? What do I get? I would be the administrative assistant of the bishop. Yes, I would like to be loving and caring, but I'd also like to be an administrator. Yeah. So, I think you're a little behind in your tithes. You know, we can send you a friendly warning. You know how they do those loan companies? Yeah. Yeah, I know. That's ugly. Because then you have to pay interest. I see this on television. It's exciting. Yeah. But the idea, of course, is that there are great centers of power. And basically, he's saying, well, again, I wonder how much is he saying this to his the other professors, and they're going, yeah, right on, man. That's yeah. And then it's sort of, I know you're always thinking, yeah, big talk. But the reality is that Jesus did very well without a big income. Yeah. So let's all just be like Jesus. And I know what you're saying. Oh, we can't all be Francis of Assisi. I get that. But he's saying that should be the standard for the clergy. You say, but how are we going to support the care center that we're helping the poor? Love. Now, I'm not going to do all the world needs is love, but the idea of fairly utopianism is to understand we'll just give up all this land. And you think, who's going to get all this land? Oh, whoever needs it. I don't think so. I'll tell you who's going to want it. The lusters. And who are lusters? They are, not saying John of God is one of them, but I'm saying there are people who have more land. And they're going to get it. And they're going, yeah, right on. Poverty for clergy. Yeah. I mean, they're loving it. Yeah, y'all do without. You don't need it. But we do. Because you know what we are? Insatiable. Like some people have money. They just can't get enough. And that's land back then. And you're saying, but are they going to use it for the Lord? Yeah, you know, yeah. So I don't want to push that point, but you get the idea. There are people that are going to take advantage of this. Say, yeah, y'all go poverty. Yeah, that's great for y'all. But the idea is that the clergy will just go around doing the will of the Lord. And he's talking about this at faculty get-togethers. I won't think you would do it in front of John of Gaunt, but I think you could do it to fellow people who, were experts and theologians like himself. And then finally, of course, the idea of rejecting church teachings that did not have biblical foundations. And boy, now you talk about hitting the fan. Because the church does not base all its teachings merely on the Bible. The church, over the centuries, had always made it clear that the teachings of the church were based as much on church traditions, meaning what had evolved over the centuries, as it did over a literal interpretation of what the Bible said. So they're sort of like, I hate to say co-equals, but you understand they're both important. Whereas people like Wycliffe are saying no, because all of this tradition is just made up and human. So it's not true. Again, I guess you would just say that in the lounge. You wouldn't be going out in downtown Oxford saying it. Boy, then we get into some details. The wicked clergyman. I know that's shocking to think about a priest with sin that, shall we say, was not forgiven, not apt to be forgiven. This was a very important point because the difference between the clergyman and the layman, according to Wycliffe, was very, very significant. Because according to him, not the church authorities, but according to Wycliffe, the wicked clergyman isn't going to do you any good. Now, I'll give you an example that I used to tell my students. I run into a priest at the corner. Now, this is when I was much younger. Father Antonio, I ran into him on the corner of College and Gay. And you say, what kind of time was that? 10 or 11 at night. And what was that priest doing? Partying. And what do you mean by that? I mean, he was meeting women. He might have been drinking more beverages than were good for him, adult type beverages. And what did Father Antonio do after that? He stumbled to his church before the hangover set in. So he was still kind of high. And then what did he do at church? He said mass. His parishioners received all the benefits of that because Father Antonio was a priest, a holy man. But you say he wasn't. I'm sorry. He had holy orders. So that meant that it counted. Not for Wycliffe. So you go to the faculty meeting. Because you know what Wycliffe's going to say? He was bad. So his sacraments are null and void. I hope I'm clear on that point. It's like the church would argue you didn't know that he was very naughty. he was out too late. College and gay can be conducive to what's wrong. Well, not if you're 18, but a priest don't need to be there. Let's just put it that way. They need to be thinking about the homily for tomorrow. But the idea is on that, if you were a nice layperson, like many of you, and then you have a copy of Wycliffe's greatest hits, and you're reading maybe the Gospel according to St. John, according to Wycliffe, you're in a lot better shape leading that Bible study and not that partying priest who is going to a place of fire. And I don't mean a barbecue either. But that idea then, of course, a clergyman can't say, yeah, but I've got my ID. I'm a clergyman. I'm a priest. Yeah. No, you're a loser. And might I say, a damn loser. Yeah. Number two, wealth, lands, endowment. Oh, God, people are getting so turned on. Just, I mean, they hear those words and think, ooh. But you know, the things can't take you with you. But they think they can, apparently. The way people try to get it. Wait, is it you can't get enough? You know, that kind of thing. But the idea is, and again, we've heard it before, Francis of Assisi and others. I mean, heretics. Peter Waldo, some of you all remember him on the continent. It's so interesting to hear it from an Englishman. Basically, just give it all up. You won't need all day, and just be like Jesus. Well, you can understand that if you were a professor of theology at Oxford and you're talking to all the faculty and everybody goes, yeah, here, you know, and all that. Yeah, that's great. But you tell it out to a group of bishops and so forth, they're going, boy, this person needs to be having thorough mental check. But that guy's nuts. Finally, transubstantiation. The power of the priest, yeah, the big T. Because that means the priest, through the priest, the bread and wine transform into Christ's body and blood. Now, I would not say that most people in 14th, 15th century England, if I said, wait, explain to me the doctrine of transubstantiation, I'm not so sure. But I'm thinking that that is what the church taught. And again, this could be carried incredibly to levels of superstition. You hear stories about how people would think they could take the bread and hold it for ransom because it was really flesh. And you're thinking, I know, but we've had the Enlightenment. But you understand since then. But I'm understanding in this time period, the idea of the power. People would even say going on to cults of the saints. We know about cult. Remember the 80s when they had the cults and all of that. You don't hear so much about that anymore, but decultified or whatever. These cults were not necessarily considered bad or wrong, but the cults were more or less groups or advocates of particular saints, and people would hold on. They would have relics. And this becomes very, very significant. You want to come to see some of our relics? There'll be a small service charge. Yeah, I mean, it's like, and they, of course, will, in some cases, be very corrupted by the ignorance of people who were true believers. But all of that was going on. Pilgrimages. Well, that still goes on today. So I'm not saying anything's wrong with it. I'm just saying that according to Wycliffe, well, I guess, if you were running one of these travel services, I mean, wouldn't that be kind of a wonderful thing? I mean, people today, I guess, want to go off to Nice or Monte Carlo or places. I know they're thinking of Sin City, Vegas, or places of Sodom and Gomorrah. I don't know. But these pilgrimages were not for fun. They're some serious spiritual activity. But the idea is that according to Wycliffe, they were essentially useless because what you had to do was what the Bible said. It's like cutting through all of this sort of how to be saved in 10 easy lessons. There's no, you can just do this kind of thing, but not according to Wycliffe. So all of this, if you stop and think of the whole church establishment, when all of this gets out, and say, I cannot believe it. He's an Oxford professor. Well, he just, the bicycle riding, Pope pipe smoking. That's one person wrote the Plainsman about us, back when there was a problem in the 80s, said, a bunch of intellectuals. So I'm sure that a lot of the church establishment was not very impressed with him, but that was, and again, this is not everything, because when you're thinking about all the practices of the medieval church, remember how many centuries have been going on? They say, unless you clean up or you have the Hoover vacuum cleaner and you take it out daily, it accumulates. Those of you who pack rats like me will understand how that can be a problem. And that's probably true in a way of the medieval church. And what happens, of course, is that it involves bureaucracy. Think about the pardoner, the summoner. They've got jobs. They got incomes. They got bills to pay. And you hear people all say that, and you understand that all of this leads to people like, who's that professor causing problems? Yeah, because where it's getting out. So let's see what's going to happen. Oh, he had grief when it all starts coming out. But it's going to. He's got the Bible is out. I'm not saying it's a bestseller. I mean, I don't know if it was on the front part of Barnes and Noble or whatever they had back then, but I am saying it will be very bad. And he's going to be summoned to a church court. You say, why a church court? Well, I mean, he's a clergyman. Remember, I think it's very ironic. He had a church living, meaning he got compensation from a parish. We call it a prebend. And what that means is that he had a living from the church, which would supplement his Oxford work, I suppose. So all of that then is to say he was very much under the authority of the church. And particularly he said, well, I said it in the faculty lounge, or I said it in my class, and my class that's privileged information. No, it isn't. You're part of the church, and you are a loser. Yeah. Now you're innocent or proven guilty, but we just received something from Pope Gregory XI. And you say, gosh, that name sounds so familiar. Of course it does. And you've been to Avignon, like certain people that I know. Gregory XI will bring some wonderful memories. He was the last of the popes in Avignon and went back to Rome. So it's not going to be on the file. Don't worry. But I just thought I would bring that out. But he had other projects. And one project was he got a set of, I guess you would say, Wycliffe's greatest hits. I mean, all the writings. And you know what he said? The writings are, rate Wycliffe writings.com. No. Very poor. He was brought before a church court. And I've got a painting of him coming up. So the Archbishop of Canterbury is going to say, you were very naughty, and the Pope was not happy with you. Luckily, again, it's nice to have a major friend at a time like this. You can't, and don't plead for academic freedom. That's just malarkey, I guess. Would that be the Irish? Inimitable is what I call John of Gaunt. I mean, I can't praise the man too much. He loved and loved too well, but in addition, he used his sway on behalf of John Wycliffe. But if you said, did he follow the teachings of John Wycliffe? Not that I know of. Maybe he said, I wish I could, but I love and love too well. And maybe in the next world I can do this. But he did a darn good job of doing the other way of life while he lived. And you know, he lived a long, full life with 3 wives and lots of offspring, as biology dictates. All of this is to say that as long as John of Gaunt was there to protect Wycliffe, as far as I'm aware, he outlasted Wycliffe age-wise, so he didn't have to worry. But his remains did have to worry. Because later, when he was finally condemned, in the Lancastrian period, so don't get the period down, down with Richard II, up with Henry, because it was even more difficult to be what will be a Lollard, because it'll all be about burning heretics. So they dug him up. And he was, and the reason they did is because he was buried in Christian area. And now they said, well, that was a big mistake. So this is pretty ghastly. I believe he had been buried in the cemetery at the church where he made a living called Lutford. But all of this then is to say that the church remembers. So it's not like, oh, let bygones be bygones. You've heard those things. You are a damned and you're going to hell, and your bones don't belong with decent people. So out you go. I love this tribe. And the reason I love it so much, there's our holy man up there. Now, look at John going up there. They allowed him to bring a weapon in. You say, really? Look at him waving that around. Boy, that Archbishop of Canterbury must have been saying, we love you very much. Oh, let's all have a big hug. Yeah, because I would be so nervous, if I were running that church court. In the event, they weren't going to do anything with him. But you notice all the Dominicans and Franciscans you see there with their hoods on. I think that's kind of interesting too. And guess who one of the court stenographers is? Now you're going to get excited. I want you to control yourself. It'll be hard. Somebody you love very much, Jeffrey Chaucer. He was, I know. I see the visible sign, the emotion that you're feeling there. But he is painted in there. Isn't that interesting? But I can't identify all the figures. And look at those two talking. That is so rude. Because you would never do that. You talking while the instructor. But there are people who would. And these two little imps down there. But the idea is that you would not want to be in John Wycliffe's position at that particular point. However, I suppose because of the Archbishop of Canterbury, despite his disapproval of Wycliffe, we always think of John of Gaunt. And think about, you sit down with the Archbishop and said, Your Grace, I know sometimes he said things, but he loves the faith very much. That kind of thing. So, intermediary, shall we say. And so, they let him go. Again, it's good to get to live through all this, because it won't matter too much after you're dead, right? I mean, they throw your bones out, but I don't wish you could. Yeah. All of this is to say that it would have stayed academic, except that some followers of Wycliffe, and they would have been largely fellow academics, must have then gone out bravely and talk about his teachings. Because how on earth would it have grown? I'm not saying there were lots of Lollards. I mean, they don't have big tent revivals or any of that. But it does grow outside the academic coffee room. I mean, it's not just those kinds of people. They would have become popular with larger groups who were, shall we say, discontented with the church. I'm still thinking it was kind of covert. Are you one? Yeah, I'm one. You want to get together? Do you have a group? Yeah, that kind of thing. I'm not thinking you would be out. I follow Wycliffe and I'm proud. No, I don't think so. That's going to be a long time. But you definitely have people who find it appealing. This would have been, shall we say, late Richard II, early Henry IV during that time. These people, who would they include? Oh, the gentry. Who are the gentry? They are the gentlemen farmers. You hear about people called Sir this and Sir that. I call them wannabe nobles. You know, it's nice to be a sir, I'm sure. And I don't mean Sir Elton John, you know, it's none of that. But these are genuine gentlemen farmers. And we know what the difference between a farmer and a gentleman farmer. Because these folks don't get dirt. They just come out and see it, you know, all this is mine. And I love all my people who work. And maybe I take time out to go to participate in the House of Commons. And I'm beginning to get more clout. All of these people is thought may have provided some of the support for Wycliffe's followers, who will be called Lollards. Why? Because, well, they resent church wealth. Perhaps they thought that church people ought to be out working for what they had, not these bishops sitting around in these big palaces and, you know, that kind of, you know. So there's some of that. But they definitely were literate, because how else would they have known about all this? I really believe that class of people, the gentry, and it's a very influential group. Now, you talk about the masses of folks, I'm sorry, but I see little evidence that these teachings are going to affect them. And that's not just snobbishness on my part. It's just clearly they can't read. Yeah, I mean, who's going to read? Somebody going to read the Bible to them? I don't think so. They're supposed to be working. These people, though, who have that education, yeah, they're the ones. But they can read that Bible and say, you're not acting like Jesus. Yeah. You acting like a big shot cardinal and you're going down. Yeah, I mean, it's like that's part of the problem, at least the possibility. Because you understand these followers of Wycliffe never became massive. I don't think that it's overflowing. And again, we're all in the closet. I'm even thinking some of these folks may have been going to mass. And you're thinking, why? Well, I don't think it would be healthy not to. I mean, it's like, oh, you want to watch football on Sunday? Well, you know, maybe that's not such a good idea. Yeah. I mean, no, I think you need to be there. Because if you're not there, that would make you a little suspicious. Because church police can come out and decide you need it. Now, what about Lollards? Lollards may refer to any group of dissenters, but in this case, Lollard is not a term of love. Oh, I just love you, my fellow Lollard. No, I don't think they called each other, hey, Lollard, I love you, man. Give me a big Lollard hug. No, I think this is more or less the idea that mumblers, because it was thought that maybe they talk softly to each other, and somehow that caught on. You're just a mumbler. You're just a loller. And so it's not nice. You wouldn't call. So I love lollardy. None of that. No t-shirt for you. Because this is just the idea. It caught on though. And so that's what they've come to be known as. Again, I call it speculation, mine, because I can't prove it, but I suspect it. because no one has provided a better explanation. Because he doesn't have some deep ecclesiastical meaning or the rest. I guess they could have called each other Wycliffites or something. But I'm thinking, well, Lollards might have a nicer ring to it. Meanwhile, these folks went on after his time, and as they did so, the idea would be that they would be able to keep themselves going, not necessarily well, but going. And it went on for a fair amount of time. Mhm.
You have to drop that back down before it'll.
Okay. Yeah, because I just want to make a
You gotta go.
thank you.
Yeah, read it.
The
No,
Just click anywhere
no,
or in the.
no, come on. We don't want copies. Next page. Try that.
there we go. Now here's my Lollar, my special Lollar, and one that will be near and dear to you because of your love of Shakespeare. Your love and dedication, nay, devotion to literature should always be welcome. So there he is, Falstaff. And who could forget him? You won't. Falstaff loved him some ale. And he had those pink cheeks, didn't he? He partied, he had a good time with Hal. Oh, I know, you're thinking of Henry IV, part 1 and part 2. You are to be praised for your devotion to Shakespeare and Chaucer. Because all of this is very important because of what we realize about him. Falstaff is based on a true historical figure, but a figure that would turn out differently because as Falstaff got older and Henry V got older, things would change quite a bit. And of course, this was Sir John Oldcastle, who, thanks to his wife, would become a titled nobleman. But despite being a connoisseur of ale, supposedly he was, at least in Shakespeare, this Falstaff, aka Oldcastle, became a Lollard. He may have had books in his home, but they were hidden in the closet though. But he became very, very serious. And as he became involved in this, despite all of his service with our beloved Henry V, the subject for next week, he became an enemy. Like somebody, you remember, like you used to go to the post office and see those people on the wall, wanted, yeah. And you say, oh no, but they were friends. Well, that was then, and this is now. Yeah. Britain's most wanted. Yeah, I know. You say, but we love them. We loved him, didn't we? Drink a lot with him, and yeah, but he's a Lollard now. That's true about Oldcastle, and boy, hey, he hid, and he got away for years. Oh, I mean, in those series, you know, when they bring them in, aren't we all thrilled when they bring them in after several years? Cuff them, Dano, you know, that kind of thing. You're going down. And that's Oldcastle. And boy, it wasn't pleasant either when he died. And, I know we all love Henry V. And we'll talk about how much we love him next week. But that didn't help our friend at Oldcastle. Because, like others, he would quickly, after being captured, be done away with in a particularly ugly way. Horrible. Yeah, I know. It's like double. Heresy and treason. Double trouble. Yeah. So that was 1417. So we are definitely in that time. And I mean, and Henry V was there. So it's not like, oh, shoot, I hate this. But it's like we had some good times. But now, probably you shouldn't have been a heretic. And he tried to escape. He had several years left, but basically that ended things. Now, as far as the future of Lollardy, after Henry V, and, he was not ruler for a long time. We have a lot more to go with the 15th century and into that wonderful time we call the Tudor era. Yes. Joy and happiness, and it will be coming to a classroom near you. But at this particular time, we appreciate the fact that the Lollards seem to have gone underground, or they were keeping mighty still, which was very wise after the end of Oldcastle and other heretics. And what happened? Well, we don't hear a lot about them, possibly because in that 16th century, guess who's coming to England? Luther and Calvin teachers. And possibly they were emerged into that idea of denunciation of the papal church and acceptance of the biblical teachings as being paramount and all other sources being inferior. So that was the end. So if you find some Lollards on your next trip to the United Kingdom, please say hello for me. And I would love to hear about them. But Henry V next time, and we will get a special presentation next time. So I hope to see you then. Okay? Thank you.